Video games can be hard. Even if you've been around games your whole life, picking up a new game can be daunting. Certain genres are more guilty of this than others. Strategy and simulation games can be overwhelming with the amount of options given to the player at once. First-person shooters can be incredibly frustrating to learn as well, as many rely on multiplayer for their main gameplay loop, which makes it hard for new players of the genre to stand a chance. And then there are fighting games. A lot of fighting games look simple on their face, but watching professional or even good players play a fighting game correctly makes it clear that there is a huge learning curve when it comes to these types of games. Fighting games have personally always been one of my favorite genres. I love the feeling of opening up a character roster and trying each character until I find a favorite. I love the feeling of getting better until I can pull off the moves I want consistently. And, most of all, I love playing fighting games with other people. I put a lot of importance on a fighting game having good single-player modes, and if I spend good money on a game, I want it to be fun even if I can only play it by myself. But while these modes can be a lot of fun, nothing comes close to fighting another player. No matter how good the AI of the opponent fighters, it just feels so much different fighting a real person, even if that person you're fighting is online. Multiplayer in fighting games definitely works best in person though. There's a technical reason for this, there's less input lag. If you're playing offline, you should have perfect gameplay with no delays, so the only excuse you can really have for losing is if your friend gave you a crappy controller. But there's so much more to playing in person than simply smoother gameplay. If you've ever played fighting games with someone of a similar skill level, you might know this feeling. You boot up the game and spend some time selecting your character, then maybe some trash talk or just catching up with a friend. You play a couple of casual matches and maybe someone gets a bit of a win streak against you. You'll naturally fight a bit harder, and then they will. And slowly over time, you break into a groove. And then the two of you are making each other better little by little, while offering each other a really fun, engaging experience. Sounds awesome, right? Well, it's not that simple. I'll use my own circumstances as an example. Of my group of friends, only a small percentage will even play fighting games, and an even smaller percentage likes them or is in a similar skill range to me. This can lead to a variety of problems when trying new games with people. Many times, a new player will be inexperienced to the point that they either will get annihilated with no chance of success, or they don't really feel like they can get a handle on what the best strategy is, so they're just hitting buttons, hoping for the best. That can be frustrating. Not having feedback for when you're doing well and not having a chance to improve can both lead to you dropping the genre as a whole, finding it all just too frustrating to learn. So you might be wondering, wow Spencer, I have had that problem. What excellent insight you have on this topic. Very relatable. But what if I wanted to get someone into fighting games? What would you recommend? First of all, thank you, but honestly, this question is kind of difficult to answer. Really, just thinking over this question is what caused me to write this video in the first place. What fighting games are really the most accessible and why? Well, I'm going to highlight some popular options and let you know what I think would be a good choice for this. However, there are a few things that you should keep in mind. Number 1. This list really isn't in any order, and I won't be making a tier list or anything like that. This is simply to give you an idea of what to look out for when picking a fighting game to learn. 2. When it comes to fighting game knowledge, I'm kind of at a weird place. I've played many hours of fighting games. I can pretty regularly win among friends and sometimes online, especially with my best characters. But with that being said, I would still be labeled casual by most of the community, which is fair when you compare my skills to those of actual professionals. It sounds crazy, but even after putting hundreds of hours collectively across a ton of different fighting games, I am still probably not even considered good by a lot of standards. I have never really been amazing at fighting games, but I feel like I understand them enough to speak on this topic. 3. I know there is an inherent enjoyment of learning and getting better at a game. Some of this may come off as me asking to remove that, but I am simply trying to offer up a typically forgotten perspective when it comes to fighting game discussion online. People need options to make the game fun, even if they're playing kind of poorly. 4. Obviously, I can only speak on games I've played. I very well might miss some, and I have a few blind spots in the genre. For example, I haven't really played a lot of Dead or Alive or Virtua Fighter, so if I make a point that is addressed by these or any other series, odds are I just didn't play it. And 5, while I'm focusing on a variety of different series, I will mostly be talking about the more current entries of each genre. It doesn't seem fair to criticize a series that has learned from previous games. Also, in the spirit of finding which game's the most accessible, it didn't make a whole lot of sense to me to recommend games on hardware that you need to buy from a used game store. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. A recent debate when it comes to this topic is Street Fighter VI's inclusion of a modern control scheme. This simplifies the controls, making character specials be mapped to the same input as one another instead of them being unique inputs. Also, there is an assisted combo system that allows you to let the game connect certain moves for you. Many thought this system was unfair, making it way too easy to spam moves. And while that's a good point, I would argue that if you lose to spammers, you weren't that great at the game to begin with. And the system balances itself out due to a natural skill ceiling and modern controls design. Due to the simplified move inputs, there are less options for inputting combos, leading to certain attack chains being completely restricted to the full control scheme. While that might be disheartening for new players to hear, it isn't like they're going to be able to pull those moves off right away anyway. This system will allow them to start playing the game without learning concepts that they might not understand right away. They can get a feel for how combat works without necessarily knowing how to perform each move perfectly. And yeah, I know building knowledge of a fighting game is half the battle, but it's also a time-consuming process and it doesn't lend itself well to quick play sessions. Look, any seasoned fighting game player will be able to easily input this, the Hadouken combo. But if people haven't played a lot of Capcom-esque fighting games, these kind of movements can be hard to explain, especially if your friend isn't next to you for you to demonstrate. It's a lot easier to say, press Y in different directions to input different special moves, or triangle if you're on PlayStation. This situation is theoretical for me in Street Fighter VI. I have not gotten the chance to play with someone in person yet, but a very familiar system was implemented in a fighting game that I have a lot of experience playing with someone else. Marvel vs. Capcom 3 has two selectable control schemes, normal and simple. Normal controls break the main controller buttons into light, medium, and heavy inputs, forcing players to use specific movements before pressing specific buttons in order to execute attacks. Simple controls break the main controller buttons down into specific types of inputs instead, with one button being normals, one button being specials, and one button being for the hyper combo. Like Street Fighter VI's modern control scheme, it allows you to learn the game without necessarily learning complex, specific inputs right away. I had played a lot of Marvel vs. Capcom 2 with my dad in the past, so I had become accustomed to the game's default control scheme, even if it was a bit different for this entry. And even without simple controls, Marvel vs. Capcom makes a lot of special moves share the same inputs. So, once you learn how to pull the movements off, you are likely to be able to play as another character no problem, which is especially important in a game where you select 3 fighters. But you know who hadn't gotten used to that style of gameplay? My sister. The two of us loved playing games together, but this is the kind of game where it can be quite easy to get into groove and just dominate. So, how would we keep this interesting? 2 things: the aforementioned simple controls, as well as a customizable handicap system that can affect how much damage each player does. She could use simple controls, and if that wasn't enough at the beginning, we'd make her do a lot more damage, slowly lowering it until we were even. Not only could my sister now consistently pull off moves she actually wanted, but I could still actually fight hard because I had a lot more ground to cover in the HP department. She also got to experiment with characters, as she was able to apply the same controls she learned across the entire roster. She understood that X was for normals, Y was for specials, and B was for hyper combo, and that was enough to start playing without needing to learn the fundamentals of quarter circles or something like that. So, she was able to quickly find a team of her own. Her final team of Rocket Raccoon, Phoenix, and Trish was definitely an interesting lineup. And while one of her core strategies in the beginning of the game looked like this,
Lock thrust attack! Lock thrust! Lock thrust! Lock thrust!
this game ended up being responsible for so many wonderful memories of playing games with my sister, and none of that would be nearly as fun if she wasn't hooked in by this game's excellent accessibility features. And even without simple controls, Marvel vs. Capcom's special moves are extremely straightforward as well once you spend some time learning the movement. And while regular moves are important to actually fighting competently, being able to consistently use specials makes the flashy gameplay a lot more exciting, especially for new players. Now, let's use Iron Man to show us how this game's normal controls work for inputting special moves. Doing a quarter circle movement forward and pressing X or square will do his light unibeam move, with these two buttons being medium and heavy versions of the same move. His other special attacks are mostly accomplished with other quarter circles or other movements in different directions. But then, let's look at Captain America. What if I do the same quarter circle movement that I did for Unibeam? Oh look, he used a different kind of special attack, but I didn't need to learn a whole new input to perform a special move. Now let's try Zero, now Akuma. You get the picture. Once you figure this out, as well as how to chain them together with regular button presses and launching opponents with the bottom button, you're on your way to playing with normal controls anyway, which will help with learning other fighting games that use similar styled specials. I would highly recommend Marvel vs. Capcom 3 as a great accessible game. Infinite just isn't as good, and 2 is impossible to play on modern hardware because Disney hates fun apparently. Most people, including my sister in this example, like seeing their characters do cool shit. If someone is casually interested in a fighting game while playing on a friend's system, the faster that they can make their guy do cool shit, the happier that they will be. Let people try characters without knowing their entire moveset. A game series that has always done this poorly is Mortal Kombat. Okay, now hold on. Let me explain. Listen, I love Mortal Kombat, but these games are not very accessible to learn. Keep in mind, I'm focusing on the games released by NetherRealm Studios, not the classic 2D games or the 3D era games for this discussion. While I have not played Mortal Kombat 1 yet, I fully plan to soon. But from what I can tell watching gameplay and reading reviews, the cameo system is the real major change to the mechanics, and it seems most of the points that I'm about to lay out still kind of apply to this whole series as a whole, at least the modern ones, including the newest entry. In Mortal Kombat, no characters share combos, and the special moves are similarly unique across characters. Mortal Kombat characters can pull off really cool moves, but learning them is another story, especially if you're interested in other characters besides one. Historically, this is how Mortal Kombat matches go with friends. Alright, yeah, I'm gonna kick your ass this time. Here we go. Oh, okay, one sec. Alright, X. Alright, and go. If you don't do this and don't remember many move inputs, congratulations, you've earned a ticket to Uppercut City, because crouching and hitting Y or triangle is the one move consistent across all characters and deals pretty decent damage. You kinda just keep falling back on it if you don't really know what a character's moves are, especially if you're going through the campaign and switching characters often. I want the game to feel like a game, not like a memory quiz. I vastly prefer when other video games teach you through gameplay and not a long drawn-out tutorial, and I feel the same way about fighting games. Give me learning tools, sure, but let me learn a little bit by jumping right in. I don't want to have to look at a chart every time I want to play a new character, at least not for very long. I mean, they have done things to try to improve this. There are X-ray moves that let players pull off a really cool super move and they only need to pull both triggers, so it's at least one flashy thing that you can do with pretty minimal game knowledge. But moves can also be pasted on the screen, helping you learn as you go. And that is nice, I like having that to refer to, but I shouldn't need a cheat sheet to fight against my friends. There's absolutely no sense of muscle memory in these games for a little while. It takes a lot longer to commit these combos to memory, and it makes coming back to Mortal Kombat after a long time feel like a bit of a slog compared to some other games like Marvel vs. Capcom, where characters kind of share similar properties, and while like combos don't go perfectly with each other, like I feel like they just kind of flow in a way. Like, how am I supposed to remember it's XBY or something like that for Scorpion's 3-hit punch, but then every other character's combos are just wildly different? I would not recommend it to a first-time fighting game player unless they would want to spend some time learning a few characters before fighting together with friends. At least, I wouldn't recommend this game nearly as much as I would some of the other games that I'm going to be talking about today. So, to switch gears to the complete opposite end of the violent spectrum, when people think about an easy fighting game to learn, a lot of people jump to Super Smash Bros. Immediately. which makes sense. The roster represents a huge number of franchises, so players are bound to know at least the big names like Mario or Pikachu. The controls are simple, with the same general moves being mapped the same for each character. Combos are a lot more improvised, relying a lot less on exact button inputs like Mortal Kombat and a lot more on spatial awareness. So why not pick Smash Bros. As the best accessible fighting game? Tons of casual gamers have a Switch, so that is bound to be accessible, right? Well, hold your horses, buddy. There's one main caveat to Smash Bros. That you need to keep in mind. You can fall off the stage. Plus, the goal is no longer just dropping HP, it's to knock your opponent off the stage by building their percentage higher and higher, making it even easier to hit them farther and farther. This hasn't been a factor in the other games we've talked about so far. And even other games that have a ring out mechanic like Soul Calibur, it's not the only way to be eliminated, and it's a lot harder to just accidentally fall off. And while this might not seem like an issue to people who have played a lot of video games, you need to keep in mind that not everyone has played a lot of platformers, so if you're not used to keeping a character alive by not falling off of the edge of a stage, it can be frustrating to die over and over just because you weren't paying attention and don't know fully how the jumps in the game work yet. Things can be done to help new players having a problem with this though. Picking a character like Kirby will give them a ton of extra jumps and will generally make it easier for them to have a fighting chance. But what if they have a favorite character and it's not Kirby? Items are also an option to help level the playing field, but at times this can have the unintended result of one player getting one strong item, which allows them to pick up another strong item while people are still dealing with all the bullshit from the first item. This can lead to a snowball effect that can make things still feel unbalanced to new players, but it does admittedly give them the opportunity for some lucky breaks here and there. Smash Bros. Does have a handicap feature that lets you assign a percentage to someone at the start of their life. This is fine enough, but I kind of wish the handicap mode made you do or take less damage. You can change damage output, but only on a per character basis, which is kind of weird. If you want to start someone off with Smash Bros., make sure that they've played Mario or Kirby or some other kind of platformer. The mechanics of Smash Bros. Can be accessible, but not to someone who would struggle with staying on top of the stage. So, what would I recommend if they aren't great at platformers? Well, this is the game series that I would recommend to anybody try with friends, even if you've never played a fighting game before. Many people would disagree with this choice. The third dimension and sidestepping do add an interesting wrinkle to the combat to learn, as well as the combo list looking intimidating, to say the least. But to me, that move list doesn't really matter for new players, as I find that you're not really looking at it all that often. Tekken is a fantastic game to learn with. You can employ a strategy that I like to call educated button mashing. You're probably familiar with the term button mashing, or it's self-explanatory enough that you get what I mean. Someone who clearly doesn't know what they're doing is just hitting shit, hoping for the best. This is not unique to Tekken. But what is unique to Tekken is that you can actually start feeling out a character while you're button mashing. Sure, you might start the match completely clueless, but slowly you'll start putting in buttons that just work. You'll actually be able to stumble upon cool moves, unlike Mortal Kombat. So as you play, you actually learn. And while you will need to press buttons in a specific order in Tekken, the window seems a lot more lenient for timing, leading to you actually remembering how you did a cool move more often. Tekken also tries to make the controls feel natural by linking each of your limbs to a button. But unlike other games that try a similar system, this game's combos just feel right in relation to these buttons. Some of this feeling is hard to describe and takes playing the game for yourself to really understand what the difference truly is. And you want to know how to do special moves? Psych, there really aren't any special moves. The moveset just kind of blends together. Some of the stronger and flashier attacks will require 2 button presses at once, but this is a lot easier to explain than directional inputs. All of this put together makes Tekken win a test that I like to call the rundown. The whole point of making this video was to determine the best game to introduce to new fighting game players. And if I'm playing a game with someone for the first time, I need to give them a quick rundown of how the controls work before the first match begins. With games like Mortal Kombat, explaining different combos, special moves, and a separate button for blocking is kind of a lot all at once. Marvel vs. Capcom is better, especially with simple controls, but then I still kind of need to get into how to use the specials. There's still a lot more mechanics that I need to explain with Super Meter and switching out characters. But with Tekken, I can say these buttons do punches, these do kicks, walking backwards blocks. With these 3 things alone, they can understand enough of the game to survive around. Then you show them what buttons to press together to do throws and stuff. Giving players the rundown in Tekken is potentially super quick, making it easier for people in a social setting to jump right in. While Tekken at high level play can rely on insanely specific sequential button inputs for long combos, we're not discussing high level play. And for casual players that are just wanting to play a game with friends, Tekken is hard to beat. Soul Calibur would be a great choice for very similar reasons. Also being published by Namco, you can tell these games have very similar philosophies when it comes to controls. Soul Calibur might be just as good, but having longer range due to every character having weapons is one extra thing to consider, so I suppose I would pick Tekken as the slightly more accessible option, but both do well on the rundown test. Soul Calibur comes down to horizontal attacks, vertical attacks, kicks, and a block button. Pretty easy to start playing with that explanation as well. I may have a bias when it comes to Tekken, but I think my own experience can do a lot to help prove my point. When I was in college, my friend Aaron introduced me to Tekken with Tekken 7. I had played it in arcades before, and had played Soul Calibur for years, but I had never really gotten into Tekken. I was hooked nearly instantly. The 2 of us slowly spread the game to the rest of our friend group, until we started having full-blown Tekken nights. We'd keep a big tally of wins and a dry erase board, and we'd all take turns as a big group, taking the loser slot each round. In most other fighting games, I feel like this really wouldn't work unless everyone at the party had played before. But we'd have people come to these, and they'd actually have a fighting chance against better players, especially if the better players were being respectful and not picking their main against them. And sure, Tekken allows you to button mash better than most games, but I don't think that it's a bad thing. When people see their character pulling off cool moves and they feel like they're having a real chance at winning, it makes something like Tekken Night not only possible, but really, really fun, and some of my favorite memories of college. Plus, if they really like the game just by button mashing, if they keep playing, they might be convinced to learn it the right way. Tekken doesn't have a simple control scheme option like Street Fighter, but it doesn't really need one. Since button mashing kind of works, that is the simple control scheme. But unlike other games, the button mashing can be so much more productive, and it gives you an opportunity to actually learn something. So, if you've never tried a fighting game before and you want to see what the genre is all about, here's my advice on how to get the most accessible experience ever. If you're an Xbox player, pick up Tekken Tag Tournament 2. It's commonly on sale for dirt cheap on the digital store, sometimes $5 or less, and it's worth way more than that. It's available on the Xbox 360 and is backwards compatible with even the newest Xbox models. It's also available on PS3 and even the Wii U with some exclusive Nintendo-themed costumes for the 3 of you who still own a Wii U. Tag Tournament 2 is also my most suggested for players who are interested in playing with a group of friends. It has the most characters of any Tekken game, and it has a tag team mechanic that is not only fun for 2 players, but can be opened up to 4 players with each player controlling one half of a tag team. My groomsmen and I played this at my bachelor party, and it was so much fun. If you play on PC or a more current PlayStation model, your best bet is probably Tekken 7, as it will probably be cheaper than the newly released 8th title if you're not super serious about the genre just yet. If your only console is the Switch, I think Smash Bros. Ultimate is probably still the best option if you still haven't gotten around to trying this series, or if it has been a while since you've played it. It's still a very accessible game, and it's probably the series I have spent the most time with playing overall with cousins and friends. Just whatever you do, stay away from the Switch port of Mortal Kombat 1. If you have an old PS2, GameCube, or original Xbox lying around, you can't go wrong with Soul Calibur 2. Copies shouldn't be that expensive from a used game store, and each version comes with its own unique guest character. Sadly, it's been delisted from Xbox Live Arcade and PlayStation Network for whatever reason. but hey, there's always other options. It is very easy to understand controls and has a lot of fun content to unlock if you want a fighting game that you want to play on your own to learn for a bit. There are so many more great fighting games to choose from too. I mean, you got Guilty Gear, Dragon Ball FighterZ, Skullgirls, or even like arena fighters like Power Stone. This video is only scratching the surface of what is out there in terms of different gameplay styles. While I hope my suggestions can give you some guidance, I know they're not perfect. And they're not even right for every person. I mean shit, this line of thinking didn't even work for my own wife. While working on this script, I asked my wife this question out of curiosity. If you could win $1 million by beating a professional or really good player of a fighting game, which game would you choose to give you the best odds of winning? I figured Tekken was the obvious answer, or maybe even Smash Bros. I wanted to know if she had felt this way too. I mean, after all, I had shown her Tekken in college and she had played it a little while. Her response? Mortal Kombat.
They ask you how you are, you just have to say that you're fine when you're not really fine, but you just can't get into it because they would never understand.
In fact, this answer might be the one I get the most often, just based purely on sales numbers. Mortal Kombat absolutely clears when it comes to sales. Its gore and pure recognition in the United States make it stand out from the others for a much, much wider audience. If you know someone who's played one fighting game, odds are it's Mortal Kombat. But if your friend comes over and wants to play a fighting game and they tell you that all they've ever played is Mortal Kombat, I would consider offering a different choice. After all, if you're any good at Mortal Kombat and they haven't played in years, then the problem I highlighted is only going to be worse. But if you think that they're experienced enough with the game that it would be easier to build off of the foundation of what they're comfortable with, then by all means, just learn it together. Just do the respectable thing and don't complain when they need to open the move list for the 700th time. Mortal Kombat is a great game and can be learned with friends, but geez, the road there is just a lot harder. So what's the final takeaway from all this? I think all in all, my thoughts can be boiled down to these points. Fighting games should usually offer a simplified control scheme for new and inexperienced players. It makes playing local multiplayer fun, regardless of skill level. Handicap settings are a huge plus. If simple controls aren't enough to level the playing field, an extra damage or health multiplier could really help make things fun and engaging for both players. When controls are shared more widely throughout the whole roster, it's a lot easier and more fun to experiment with characters during one play session. Ultra character specific combos reward memorization, but don't engage new players necessarily all that well. And finally, let me learn as I play. Being able to learn as I play will always be more engaging than reading a list of inputs. A game's controls should be easy enough to explain that a player can just start playing and having fun right away in at least some capacity. Accessibility is always a good thing. It lets you introduce people to the genre without turning them away from it on their very first play session after being absolutely destroyed. Everyone should be able to enjoy games at whatever intensity they desire. With fighting games being known as such a hard genre to learn, I think it's important to start breaking down that stigma and offering more ways to play them. When looking at a fighting game, it can be easy to put a lot of value into things like graphics, roster size, or a million other aspects of what makes games cool. But at the end of the day, if the controls are so inaccessible that I can't play a fair, fun match with my friends locally, and I can't figure out the controls that quickly, then the main point of fighting games has been lost.
I want fighting games to be more accessible, because there's no feeling quite like looking your friend in the face after you beat them and asking if they want a rematch. And hopefully, if the game is accessible enough to them, they'll say yes.
I got a lot of gameplay footage from some of the channels listed here. Everything is going to be listed in the description, but bye for now.